let me thank all the executive of ELSA, Philip Chu in particular, David, Sutap and all actually for the honor of this lecture this afternoon. If you see at the turn of this century, the technical feasibility of an endoscopic appendectomy was shown from our department. Now, this flexible endoscopic peritoneal surgery by pioneers and experts in institutions across the globe took the medical world into a world of fantasy. Everybody seen this and they dreamt of doing these procedures of an endoscopic appendectomy. For some of you who have not seen this video, it is an endoscopic view wherein you get into the peritoneal cavity like what Philip Chu has showed you, make an access in the stomach, get into the peritoneal cavity. And then once you're in the peritoneal cavity, you dissect out this appendix. And then once at the end of the procedure, this entire appendix is brought out to the mouth. Now this one procedure seems to have changed the entire concept in which surgery can be done. And subsequently, there are a lot of data to show that similar endoscopic cholecystectomies can be done. But something surprisingly, it was something similar to the Apollo adventures or the Apollo landing on the moon. Now, the consistency and repeatability of these procedures was questioned across the globe. And this obviously is basically because a lot of limitations. We jumped suddenly from the lumen, we started doing polypectomies, and we jumped from the lumen onto the peritoneal cavity. The jump was so huge without proper understanding of the anatomy and without proper equipment available for these procedures. Now, the third space has come in a big way, and it's an unexplored space. That is, what is the interface between the endoscopists and the surgeons. The understanding of the third space and the varied therapeutic options that are available in this has led to a new science, a new topic, and a new specialty called third space endoscopy. And we started doing these procedures like what Philip has shown you, EMR, ESD procedures, to lesions which can be picked up from the third, fourth layer of the stomach. Now, there were several limitations of this endoscopic surgery, and basically because of this, hybrid nodes or hybrid node procedures came in, and that's basically because of certain limitations and also availability of the equipment. Now, this hybrid endoscopic procedures was the first term was first coined by Rodok way back in 1937. Subsequently, the terminology changed from various intraluminal laparoendoscopic surgery, endogastric surgery, laparoendoscopic surgery, or endoluminal surgery, or we call it as lap endocollaborative surgery. All these are the similar names, and then it is also called as laparoscopic endoscopic cooperative surgery. Now, there are umpteen number of options available for this. This hybrid endoscopy, hybrid procedures that you're talking about. It could be because of hybrid instrument wherein you use flexible and flexible instrument, or a rigid instrument, or use a combination of rigid and flexible instruments, or it could be a hybrid access where you have a dual multiple access, or you're having an endoscopic access and a laparoscopic port. All these constitute some sort of a lap endoscopic cooperative surgery. Now, this is a cooperation between endoscopists and laparoscopic surgeons. It's a win-win situation. It is not you lose some, you win some, but ultimately it's a win-win situation for both the physician, the endoscopist, and the surgical community. Now, a lot has to be understood when you're talking about this new laparoscopic endoscopic hybrid surgery, and you're supposed to know about the interface between the endoscopy and surgery. Now, basically, as I told you, endoscopists traditionally limited their access or interventions to the luminal side, and surgeons have limited purely onto the pleural side or onto the peritoneal side. Now, what has happened with the recent advances, recent innovations in techniques, endoscopists started moving from the lumen outside, and there are a lot of interventions from the peritoneal cavity onto the luminal side. So there is a lot has been happening in the last decade or so. So we need to understand a lot of things before we venture into this new era of laparoendoscopic surgery. The question that are repeatedly asked is conventional anatomy applicable in current day endoscopic and laparoscopic practice. Now, we all as clinicians, we claim that we know the Gray's anatomy inside out. This is the famous mnemonic that people keep saying, that we have read Gray's anatomy inside out, and we know the anatomy inside out. But surprisingly, this is a myth. Gray never wrote the anatomy inside out. He wrote the anatomy outside in. The entire anatomy, whatever we know, is the anatomy that we look at going from outside to inside. So the conventional anatomy, so if you see these are the abdominal organs. Now if you see, whenever we're doing any procedures, we're going from outside to inside, or from the lumen into from the peritoneal cavity into the gut lumen. But the newer procedure, the third space endoscopy you're talking about, a hernia on the laparoscopic side, you're going from the peritoneal side onto the skin, and also we have other endoscopic procedures wherein we started going from the lumen into the peritoneal cavity to do this procedure. Something like this, endoscopy is from serosa to mucosa, endoscopy is from mucosa to serosa. If you see, this is what happens. And this is the endoscopic view of the esophagus that you talk about. Traditionally, we just know this is the anatomy. We talk about 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 12 o'clock positions. But we also supposed to understand what is outside this lumen so that we can do these procedures, the transmural procedures, very effectively without causing any complications. It is like what happened when we all, the open inguinal anatomy is totally different from the laparoscopic inguinal canal anatomy. We have relearned the entire anatomy when we started doing laparoscopic inguinal hernia. Similar way, I think we have to rewrite the entire anatomy for these endoscopic procedures wherein we go from the lumen onto the peritoneal side. This is the luminal side on the left side, this is the serosal side, but what we need to understand is the different layers of the stomach and the lymphovascular structures and how we have to gain access into the peritoneal cavity without much morbidity and mortality in these procedures. So what we have to do whenever we are doing this third space endoscopy or advanced endoscopy procedures or these endolaparoscopic procedures is to unlearn the outside-inside anatomy and relearn the inside-out anatomy. This is very, very essential. Without understanding this anatomy, I do not think we should venture into these advanced procedures so that we avoid any major catastrophes during these procedures. This is basically because there are several anatomical, structural, vascular variations that we encounter. We all read about this when you are doing our convention during our medical school. Like this, actually, there are limitations. Actually, I can show you whenever we have an obese patient, the heavy fat limits the distension of the stomach as compared to a lean patient. Now, this is basically because of the heavy omentum, fatty omentum, which limits the distension. Likewise, the MIS, the endoscopy, the third space endoscopy or laparoscopy is all about working in positive pressures in potential spaces. Now, is conventional surgical physiology applicable in current day clinical practice? Now, if you see, this is conventional surgery wherein the outside atmospheric pressure is equivalent to the peritoneal pressure. So this is what we have been doing. Once we started doing laparoscopy, we increased the intra-abdominal pressure and we relearned the entire physiology of this so that we can deal with these patients very effectively perioperatively. Now, when we started doing endoscopy, the luminal pressure is more. And when we started doing third space endoscopy, you can see the pressure in the lumen and also the pressure in the third space is very high. And we started doing endolaparoscopic collaborative surgery. You can see there is increased pressure in the peritoneal cavity, increased pressure in the third space, and increased pressure in the gut lumen. So this is very, very important to understand because a lot of physiological changes occur and we have to work very closely with our anesthetists so that we do not have any perioperative problems during these procedures. So the endoscopic carbon dioxide insufflators are not still fully automated like we have on the laparoscopic side. The semi-controlled high pressure delivery of carbon dioxide into the third space tight compartment combined with high pressures in the two compartments causes physiological changes. And this we need to be aware and we have to require close monitoring during the entire surgical process. Likewise, cross-sectional imaging for advanced endoscopic procedures, we have the sagittal plane, we have the transverse plane or the coronal planes. As far as this is what we do, transverse and coronal sections for esophagus are very good because we know we'll be able to absolutely know the relations of these various pathologies that we encountered during these procedures. These are very good. But when we start going into the abdomen, the sagittal sections are ideal for advanced endoscopic procedure. You can see this. This is the direction in which the scope goes, and you can see that very clearly the direction of the pathology and the direction in which we traverse. Especially suppose if you're talking about wand, like what Anthony Theo has shown you, sometimes you get these wands which are extending across the lesser omentum onto the anterior side. It is very, very difficult to predict this. These sagittal sections go a long way in planning for these procedures. So these sagittal sections are ideal for advanced endoscopic interventions, especially in the stomach, because of various structural and anatomical abnormalities that we encounter, and also to look at the adjacent visceral structures, blood vessels, and also look at the gastric and perigastric collaterals. Let's get on to the bariatric and metabolic endoscopy. A lot has been happening, umpteen number of techniques that are available for obesity and for metabolic therapy. Now, these are all, most of these endoluminal restrictive procedures, the endoscopic procedures are all based on the laparoscopic procedures. The results of the laparoscopic surgery have been translated onto the endoscopic side. We have many of these procedures that have come, and we have this endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty, which is coming in a big way in the management of these patients with obesity. There is data to show that it is being increasingly used in the treatment, and it's gaining access into the treatment algorithms. But surprisingly, if you see this endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty is a semi-blind procedure. This is a suturing device, what Philip has shown you, beautiful device. This is the only device which can show that the endoscopists can be very, very sure that they can do suturing. But surprisingly, what happens is these are semi-blind procedures, and most of these sutures that we take need not be full thickness sutures. And it is likely, surprisingly, and very rightly, the stomach is heavily perfused. That is the reason we don't see any ischemic changes in spite of taking these multiple sutures, because of the extreme good perfusion of the stomach. And you can see this is the serosal aspect of one of these patients who has undergone endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. Only couple of sutures are full thickness, rest of all are not full thickness sutures and just mucosal sutures. And you can see this one of these procedures. You can see this is the video of a patient who underwent the ESG. You can see this. Only 2 or 3 of these sutures are full thickness sutures. And if you see the luminal side, you can see this. Most of these are just mucosal stitches, which looks like some sort of a trabeculae that we see in ulcerative colitis patients. So most of them are not full thickness sutures. This technique has shown that we can do a good endoscopic suturing, but I think we need ways and means to improve this technology so that we get full thickness bites. Maybe we slightly to take full thickness bite because of the associated complication that can come. Now this is another patient. You can see this. This is the only 2 bites that have been taken full thickness, and these patients underwent a revision surgery again subsequently following ESG procedure. So I personally believe, I think we have a good advantage of using this mini laparoscopes. Actually, you can use this 5 mm laparoscopes during these procedures as an aid to make sure that you're taking full thickness bites, so that any associated complications can be avoided. And also, suppose if we have infrared laparoscopy that is attached to this, maybe you can also check the gastric perfusion as you're doing this. This may not be essential because stomach is heavily perfused. This may not be required. But I personally believe that whenever we're doing this to get a good bite, we can always use a 5 mm scope to make sure that you're getting full bites. Likewise, there are several of these endoscopic procedures that have come, which are purely based on the results of the laparoscopic surgical procedures. All of them have been translated. Now, most of the duodenal endoscopic procedures that are coming in or are being used are basically, they mimic the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and the results of this have been extrapolated to this. We look forward to this, but these are certainly they look very promising, and they seem to be act as a bridge to surgical intervention. Certainly seem to be the game changers, especially for metabolic interventions. Now this is another indication for this. Actually, this now of late there is a lot of big role for indigocyanine green being used by laparoscopic surgeons in every part of surgery. Now this is basically an intralesional injection of ICG to pick up sentinel node so that we pick up this. This is the beautiful thing that has come, wherein you're combining endoscopy and laparoscopic procedures together. You can see this. This is how you inject indigocyanine intralesionally, and you're able to pick up the sentinel nodes, and then we so the surgery is basically planned based on this finding that you see on infrared laparoscopy. Likewise, now endocytoscopy is used during diagnostic laparoscopy. Here we're using an endocystoscope in a patient with peritoneal metastatic disease. You can see this. We are doing, it's a real-time in vivo histology wherein we are able to see the tumor emboli in the blood vessels. So as compared to a frozen section, this is a real-time image, And you can see this dynamic images of histology that we have never seen before. So this is the combined endoscopic and laparoscopic procedure again, which is going to be a game changer in future. Now, this is again, though it's not a laparoscopic procedure, it's chronic pancreatitis with a patient with a stricture in the head. We tried to do a head coding procedure in this patient. Surprisingly, we found a stricture and then we stained it with methylene blue and put in the cytoscope. And you can see this is the malignant stricture in this. Likewise, we have this now IPMN. There is increasing role of pancreaticoscopy, especially in patients undergoing IPMN. Pancreaticoscopy is coming into the algorithms of management of patients with IPMN. Be it the lab Whipples or open Whipples, centers have started doing laparoscopic Whipples for with good expertise. Here is one such patient who underwent a Whipples procedure, and you can see this after transected, we put in the scope into the remnant pancreas and we picked up an additional lesion a centimeter away from the transected margin, and this is a revised specimen again. So you can see this during this laparoscopic or open Whipples, actually intraoperative pancreaticoscopy is becoming more and more popular. This is used basically to pick up skip lesions which are not picked up from conventional cross-sectional imaging. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, actually umpteen number of procedures have come. Actually, they're all in clinical, I personally feel they're all still in clinical trials. We just have to wait for this. Absolutely, as in today, we are still awaiting for an ideal technology that can be compared to laparoscopic fundoplication. We have good results that are coming up with various technologies that are in the market, but we still have to wait for long-term results of this before we can say that they can completely replace or they can be equal to laparoscopic fundoplication. Likewise, actually, there are several of these procedures which cannot be done endoscopically, like this denture, which was impacted in the esophagus, or this is a large esophageal diverticulum. These, sometimes it is very difficult to do it endoscopically in spite of every possible expertise that we have. You know, in these circumstances, a combined laparoscopic procedures are very, very useful. And this expertise makes these procedures very more amenable. More of these patients can be salvaged using these procedures, and you can see this. This is how we can extract this impacted denture, and likewise the diverticulum can be completely excised using a complete endoscopic assistance. Achalasia cardia, POEM, actually Philip has given a beautiful and Jimmy has given a beautiful review of the entire thing. Actually, we are totally convinced that myotomy can be done endoscopically with an excellent view and beautifully. I mean, there is no comparison. We can show that the myotomy is absolutely as similar to what we do on the surgical side. Biggest disadvantage of the biggest drawback of this laparoscopic or endoscopic POEM procedure is basically that a significant number of these patients seem to have gastroesophageal reflux disease. Now, whenever we are doing a laparoscopic procedure, we always do a partial fundoplication to overcome this, but this is not possible as in today endoscopically, but there are ways and means because there is an initial editorial thinking that reflux could kill the POEM procedure, but no, POEM-F has come in a big way. This is still in infancy. We just have to wait for the long-term results before we can say this can be done very, very safely. But yes, it can be. It is shown that we can do some sort of a fundoplication endoscopically. So, though POEM has equal efficacy to laparoscopic Heller's myotomy, now there is the reflux that is associated with POEM is of concern, and we need to identify this group of patients who will develop reflux, and maybe we add an anti-reflux procedure. So post-POEM reflux, we have three options: POEM plus laparoscopic fundoplication in the same admission. Absolutely, I don't think this is advisable, because if you have to do, we can do a laparoscopic procedure per se. Now, POEM followed by laparoscopic fundoplication, yes, this in patients who have reflux. It is not that every patient has reflux. Some of these patients who are not manageable with medications, who require some sort of an intervention, yes, POEM can be followed by a laparoscopic fundoplication. And POEM plus endoscopic fundoplication, I think we'll see more and more of this in future. We have to wait for this data to come in before we can say that these patients can be done totally endoscopically. So as in today, in our center, what we traditionally believe is POEM follow up this patient with medication. If they have significant reflux, are not able to manage on medication, I think these are the patients who require some sort of a fundoplication procedure. Third space endoscopy, yes, it's a big new area in endoscopic arena. And this is basically because we have better understanding of subepithelial tumors which are being increasingly detected. We know better knowledge of their biological behavior, and segmental minimally invasive resectional techniques based on sound oncological principles have been developed, and there are better functional outcomes and faster recovery. And so umpteen number of these procedures have come. I think Philip has already shown you all these procedures. I'll show you a couple of these. Now, these procedures basically tailored management based on the location of the tumor. It is not that the same procedure can be done for every single SCT that we see. These have to be tailored based on the position, and there is a lot of data to show that these complete resection can be achieved with absolutely very, very minimal complications in these procedures. Lot of data from across the globe to show that endoscopic resections can be very effectively done. In areas where it cannot be accessed completely endoscopically, we can do a combined endo and laparoscopic procedure like this patient with a GIST at the G junction. We put in a PEG catheter, and through the PEG catheter, we passed a rigid harmonic scalpel and excised this endoscopic vision and extracted this specimen endoscopically and subsequently pulled out this PEG catheter. So this is basically a combined endoscopic and laparoscopic procedure. Likewise, endoscopic assistance, we can do several of these resections can be done. Sometimes it may not be possible to see these lesions on the endoscopic side, then on the laparoscopic side. So we always require some sort of an, assistance on the endoscopic side to localize these tumors and do these procedures. Likewise, Philip has shown you a full thickness resection. Yes, full thickness resection can subsequently be totally be sutured endoscopically using the suturing device. But wherein the expertise is not available, I think these are the patients who require a laparoscopic assistant, a combined assistant. You do a full thickness resection, and once you've done a full thickness resection, this can be closed laparoscopically. So this is the bigger advantage. But I'm sure in the days to come, with increasing expertise on the endoscopic side, a laparoscopy can be avoided in this. And you can see this full thickness resection. Philip has shown you a lot of data, good results, excellent results with minimal complications. Likewise, we have this lot of these procedures which can be a lot of these SCTs which require some sort of an endoscopic assistance. Like you can see this is a huge GIST that can be that is being resected and endoscopic assistant. Subsequently, we check the integrity of the thing, make sure that there are no leaks, and make sure that we are getting adequate margin. Likewise, in this patient, actually, we open the stomach and then get into the gastric wall, do a full thickness resection, and subsequently close the defect laparoscopically. So these are some of these examples, and there are a lot of data to show that complete resection is possible using these combined techniques with absolutely zero mortality in these procedures. So you can see this, there are several of these new procedures which are based on the type of the SCT that you encounter. Now these lesions are absolutely very good for endoscopic resection. These lesions require slightly more expertise. Now these are the lesions which require some amount of caution, and these are the lesions which require a combined endo and laparoscopic procedures so that this can be done very effectively. Likewise, early gastric cancer, this has been shown very effective initially. Now you can see this is how you resect this and you verify the tumor location, orientation, and we provide assistance, and any adverse events can be addressed during intraoperative, during this procedure. So likewise, now this is a neat procedure that is seen actually, wherein we do a combined endo and laparoscopic procedure. We have submucosal injection has been done, and on the laparoscopic side, we can say that this is how you mark out this entire lesion, and then you do a seromuscular incision from the laparoscopic side, and once you have done this, you invert this entire lesion inside using these seromuscular sutures, so that this lesion gets inverted into the thing. And as we're doing this procedure, maybe we can put some Surgicel to make this lesion very prominent. And once this becomes very prominent, this can be very effectively excised endoscopically. So this basically avoids any spillage of the cancer cells into the peritoneal cavity. And this has been shown to be of great promise, and we are getting increasing number of publications which show that these procedures can be done very safely. And there is some data which came as early as 2011, wherein they said endoscopic full thickness resection and laparoscopic lymph nodal dissection can also be done. This, I think, is very promising. I think in the days to come, we'll see more and more of these procedures. And transoral mediastinoscopy is another procedure that is becoming, might come in a big way into clinical practice. Initial results with animal experiments are quite encouraging, and we'll see more and more of these procedures. And as I told you, third space is a new modality and a new science and a new specialty by itself, wherein umpteen number of these procedures can be done. And in the near future, we'll be seeing more and more of these futures. This is a flexible endoscopic robotic system Philip had shown you, done with the help of Singapore National University Hospital and along with Prince of Wales Hospital. This is the first ever time we did this procedure. This has shown that the procedures can be done very fast, and combining this with a rigid or a conventional robotic system could further enhance the results of some of these cases. And we look forward to combined flexible robotic system and also the rigid robotic system in future. Now this, way back almost in 2002, 2003, when we initially started doing these advanced procedures, when we were talking about these advanced procedures, one of the very senior scientist, one senior engineer has given this diagram to me, showing that, telling me this is the sort of scope that you require to do all these procedures. You can see this was drawn way back in 2004. And more and more of this newer equipment seems to be coming into clinical practice. We need to deconstruct the entire scope that we have, and we need to have newer scopes like this, which could change the entire management in way in which we deal. So we need industry support and also superheroes to come in a big way to do these procedures. We need newer modalities for access creation and safe closure of these access. We require newer energy sources which can be used on the endoscopic side, and we require newer dissection and extraction techniques that can be used for all these procedures, so that these procedures can be done very effectively. So we need all these people from across the globe. We need to come together for an holistic endoscopic laparoscopic interface. To conclude, endoscopic laparoscopic technologies are rapidly evolving. Many of the endoscopic procedures have evolved over surgical rationale. The science behind the surgical techniques led to better understanding and led to the development of innovative hybrid procedures. We need to relearn anatomy physiology applicable to emerging procedures, especially for third space endoscopy and endolaparoscopic surgery. Endoscopy have replaced some, aided some, competing with some, and complementary to some surgical options. Endoscopic assistance has improved surgical outcomes and vice versa. I'm sure endolaparoscopic surgery is a big specialty by itself. So when notes came in, you can see this, because of the lack of equipment, lot of technology, people thought this would go away. There was a lot of depression, confusion, crisis. At a stage when entire thing, people thought it would no more a viable option. But again, third space, newer interventions into third space endoscopy came in a big way, and people started accepting these procedures, and we have these hybrid procedures that are coming in a big way. And I'm sure in the days to come, we'll make true notes a reality from this hybrid endoscopy. So the future is going to be, from open surgery, we went to laparoscopic surgery to MIS. So from flexible endoscopy, you've seen various innovations that have been done by Philip and also by Anthony Theo. So I think we'll have a totally new specialty that is going in to come, wherein we have people who are trained in flexible endoscopy and laparoscopy who are going to make this specialty very, very popular. This is not only the specialty will become popular, but this will decrease the intervention, the degree of invasiveness, and also I'm sure it will improve the morbidity, mortality associated with these procedures. I'm sure the future is going to be pure tech surgery. It's a combination of endoscopic and laparoscopic surgery. For all those people who thought it's a fantasy, I'm sure it's no more a fantasy. I think it's a reality, the reality coming true. I'm sure we've lived this age, and I'm sure in the days to come, we'll see this becoming reality. Thank you very much once again for the hearing. If there are any questions from the thing, I'll be able to take. I'll check the questions from my side.
Thank you.